Morning everyone, thank you Peter. I'm going to talk a lot about neighbours I guess. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail or a lot of detail. So the main thing about today is if you have any further questions, come and see me afterwards or get in contact and I'm more than happy to have a lot more conversation around this with you. Generally as people, we spend a lot of time in buildings, whether that's at home or at work. Majority of my time, I would say, is in a building. The buildings that I want to occupy, I want them to be warm, I want them to be healthy, and that's no different to the work environment. The challenge has always been is how do you measure performance or how do you measure success of a commercial building? So over the years, we've spent some time to verify this within ECA. We searched the world basically to see what sort of building energy rating systems there were, and we looked at a wide range, the BRING, the LEED model, also Green Star, all the other parts. But one thing we felt that a lot of buildings were missing was performance measurements. So it was very easy to build a green building. You could get a green building with all the modern features that makes it efficient, that makes it green, that helps it operate more efficiently. But one thing a lot of them were lacking was the actual benchmarks of performance after that. So buildings are very complicated structures and they're all very individual. I'll show you a few examples about how they are individual, but if you basically walk out to the terrace or anything today, no two buildings will be the same. They're all very different. They all operate very different, they've all been built in different eras, and that requires a different knowledge to make sure they operate efficiently. If you go buy a Toyota Corolla off the production line, there's been a lot of people behind the scenes making sure that is an efficient car. They've had a lot of R&D put into it, and then they put it out to the mass market. The challenge with commercial buildings is they're all unique, they're all individually built, they're all individually constructed, and they've all got, yes, energy efficient products in there, but if they don't all work together, that doesn't mean that you've got an energy efficient building. So what is NABERSNZ? Let me make sure I got this right. It's a star rating system that benchmarks performance, and those two are the key words. It's a benchmark system and it measures performance. So when we brought it out to New Zealand, we had a collection of building data between ECA and brands, and we're able to establish what the average New Zealand building energy consumption is. And that equals a 3-star rating. So 3-star is based on New Zealand conditions, what an average building should be. Anything lower than that is obviously below average, anything above that is above average. So that's out of all the buildings throughout New Zealand, and it just gives you a bit of context. So to get to 6, which is aspirational, there's none of them at the moment. There's a couple of 5.5 star, there's lots of 5-star, lots of 4, 4.5 star. And then there's not a lot of 1 and 2 star, but that's predominantly because people who are in inefficient buildings or own inefficient buildings don't go through the process to get that N rating. So they normally stop. So at the moment, our average NABERSNZ rating is more around 4-star in the system, but that's only because the poor performers aren't actually doing it. And we want to increase performance of buildings. So the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority isn't a stamp of approval for the best buildings in the country. It's about improving performance of poor stock, and that's what we're ultimately here to do, is to help people with poor stock improve it and get a higher rating. NABERS isn't too complex. It's actually quite a simple system. It's robust and it's got some rules. So the reason I like it is it does do that performance, not intent. It doesn't care how it's designed, doesn't care if it's a new building, it's an old building. It treats every building the same. It doesn't care if you've got no air conditioning or full air conditioning, it doesn't care if you've got glass windows or sandstone walls. It just doesn't matter. It's rules-based, so I'll go over some of the rules. It makes allowances for different service deliveries, which I'll go through in a little bit more detail as well. But it's a simplified system. There's basically 4 bits of data that it measures that creates the operational use of buildings. So this is a building here in Auckland. Sorry, I've come down from Auckland today. This is Eden Business Park. And on the face value of it, this is a building I used to work in. It's broken down into 3 separate buildings. And from the outside, this is one building in New Zealand that may look the same on the outside, but as you can see, just on that roof line itself, there's a lot of different equipment up there, and that's all your different air conditioning and HVAC equipment. So for a building that pretty much looks the same as the 3 look exactly the same, they actually operate quite differently. But how do you measure success? How do you know which one's performing the best out of those 3? They've all got different tenants, One of them had a gymnasium, so they had different operating hours. Others had longer operating hours for office staff, and various different various different tenancies in another one. So that's the reason that I like NABERS. It starts to look at those three buildings and just does it on performance. And it turns out that a lot of buildings do vary over time as well, so that's got to be taken into consideration. So not necessarily this one, but a lot of new buildings change function over the years. So activity-based working was never invented when some of these buildings that we do right now, but now they're coming into activity-based working. How does that change the operation of the building? What sort of air conditioning need to put there? How much more load? What's the lighting going to be like? When you take walls out of a building, what's that going to do to all the operational parts? So it's quite important to understand what it is, and the simplicity of this tool, it brings it all back. And I'll try to explain how that can affect everyone in this room for productivity and performance of the office. So it's basically like apples for apples. It's about standardizing. It's a calculation in the background that not many people get to see, but it takes in consideration about where that building is. So it measured benchmarks. If you're in Dunedin, it's different than Auckland, which is different than Wellington, which is different than Kerry. So it's all different around the country. That's all in the back house, so you don't see that, but it takes that in, because that can impact how you rate. It takes in things like operating hours. So once again, it's not there to say that you can't run on long hours, but it will penalise you if you run the building inefficiently. The best example I can give for this is if you've got a 20-storey building and you've got one level on that building that needs to run 24 hours a day, it won't penalise you if you run that building efficiently. And what I mean by that is if you turn the lights off and the air conditioning off on all those other floors and just one run floor 24 hours a day, you'll get a good rating. If you run that whole building with all the lights going and all the air conditioning going for 24 hours a day, it will penalise you for that because it takes in the consumption of energy through that whole building over a 12-month period. So it's very focused on a set of rules, and if you can't prove that you're within those rules, then it sort of penalises you. So it starts to get you into good practice. Another example of that is diesel tanks. You know, if you can't prove that you filled your diesel tank up or haven't filled your diesel tank up, it assumes you used all that diesel within the year. So it starts to get you to make sure you've got all the documentation to make sure everything's in line. So in a nutshell, what is NABERSNZ? NABERSNZ is three different types of ratings. You've got a tenancy rating, you've got a base building rating, or you've got a whole building rating. Now the reason they're broken up into these three different sections is you can only affect what you can control really. So a tenancy can only control what's in its tenancy office. So predominantly that's your lighting, that's your computers, that might be your server room. So you've got control over that. You've got control what time you turn the lights on, what time you turn them off. You've got control over what type of lighting or what type of laptops and PCs you put into your office and server rooms. The base building is what the landlord generally has control over. That's your air conditioning, your lighting, your diesel generators. So that's generally something you as tenants don't have control over, but your landlord has control over it. And then the whole building is basically both put together is a whole building. So NABERSNZ puts everything into a big package and it wants to know how much that space is consumed. So that means if you've got an electric vehicle, that doesn't get consumed on site, so you can take that out of your rating. If you've got server rooms that serve the whole country, but not everyone sits in your office, you can exclude that from rating. So it just takes what energy is used within that box that we know as a building. Out of interest, a basic separation is, I think it was 58% of energy is consumed by base building and about 42% is consumed by tenancy. So there's still a big influence on both sides to improve. This is something that I want to see in New Zealand have a lot better information on. So I take this from NABERS in Australia. This is showing performance over a long period of time. And this is why ECA got involved in something like this, because we're about continuous improvement. And this shows that over time, if you start to do this regularly, they mandated it in the public sector over there, you start to get performance and improvements all the time. A lot of people say, I'm the best performing building in town, I don't need to do anything. The very interesting thing that we came with, but we can't say who and what, but a lot of the buildings we started doing that are getting those third and fourth ratings now, actually a premium end of the markets. And when we first rated them, they were 1 or 2 star. A lot of them were quite poor. And the reason for it is they weren't really keeping good track of how they were managing it. They were just making sure tenants were comfortable. So this here sort of measures performance and shows you what it can be. If you link this into what the government's also doing with zero carbon and things like that going forward, you know, everyone's got to step up, everyone's got to improve. And if we want to reduce by 50, 100% of energy use, this is just a tool that can go part of the way there. But how do we do that? There's a study that was done called Low Energy High Rise, and that took into account around 2,000 buildings, and it tried to assess what made the biggest improvements in energy efficiency to get those star ratings improved. And here's some of the examples of the main reasons, not all of them, but building technology was 1.4 star improvement. If you take in consideration that every half star improvement is 13%, that's almost 39%. That building technology is new equipment. That's putting new chillers in, new boilers in, new lightings in. Major asset replacement programs. You jump down one that's very much the same, it's management. That's 1.3 stars. And this is the one that I'm interested in, because management isn't about spending a lot of money. It's just about managing your portfolio better. Some of the outcomes from this was an in-house facilities management company performed better than an external facilities management company. It showed that facilities managers or property managers that had technical knowledge, that had energy efficiency knowledge, that understood how their building operated, had better improvement than people who didn't. So it's all about knowing your building, understanding your building, and making sure you make it work for what it is, not just run a building for the sake of running a building. The next one is our economy cycle. So for all those that don't understand what economy cycle is, it's a HVAC term. It's bringing outside air when the conditions are right. So in the middle of winter, if you need cooling in a building, you can actually just have a fan and bring outside air instead of having cooling. So it's quite efficient. New Zealand, it's quite a good measure because we've got such a mild climate that it can be used quite a lot, and it's very successful when it does use. But if you go down to 0.5 star disclosure, so just remember that 13% for every half star. Disclosure is about telling people what you're doing. It's about saying that I want to be a 4 star, or I want to maintain a 4 star or 4.5 star. It's about telling the market, it's about telling your building owner. And that alone is proved to drive efficiency rates. As soon as you tell people, you do get change. As soon as you don't get measured, you don't tell people, then it's very easy to forget about it. So that's a few numbers, but a lot of it is about benefits. And Peter asked me to do a little bit about benefits here. It's one of those stories that's really hard to say, because whenever I talk about benefits, a lot of people say, oh, it all goes to the owner. This is the owner asset. It's going to improve the worth of the asset. You're going to get more capital gains, all this sort of stuff. So the owner benefits from this all the time. So why is the owner not doing it? Well, some owners are doing it, and I'll show you some evidence of that, and they are more increasingly doing more and more. But a lot of owners are also saying, but my tenants don't demand it, so why am I going to spend extra money doing this sort of stuff when my tenants don't want it? So if my tenants don't want it, I don't need to spend any money doing it. They're not complaining about it. Why not just bank that money as well? So there's a bit of a catch-22. So they want to do it, but they want to see demand to do it. They want tenants to do it. And that's why I guess the public sector is quite an important part for this, because they are the largest tenant within the country, and they can help drive change and uptake, you know, both internally, but also externally with the base building and the owner's equipment. The tenant's perspective, it reduces operating costs, but, you know, once again, that depends on what your lease is. Sign of quality, promote sustainability values, along those lines. Now, that is true, and a lot of the other things we say, it increases productivity. Once again, there's some reports that say it does increase productivity, but it's a very hard measure to come back to, because what else increases productivity? What if you're having a restructure at work? How do you measure productivity? Is it a report you do each month? Are you better at doing that report than what you were last month? It's a very hard measure to continuously do. But ultimately, if you go back to, we spend a lot of time in buildings at home and at work, you know that good quality, you know that an efficient house, you know that an efficient commercial building will make you happier, will make you perform better. It doesn't take rocket science. If you've got clean air in your house, you will perform better. If you've got clean air at work, you will perform better. And it's all about putting a bit of a measure. And that comes back to this property managers. So we said that it could improve 1.5 star. So it comes back to them. How do we measure these guys that they're doing a good job? How do we measure that the owner's doing a good job? And for me, I come from the HVAC refrigeration industry. I did a lot of servicing when I was younger for about 20 years, did a lot of project management in that field. And a lot of organisations we competed with, a lot of organisations I worked with, all said they were energy efficient, all provided energy efficient stuff, but we never got measured on it. We always got measured on how quickly could you get it fixed, how cheaply could you get it fixed. There was never a conversation about proving that you are energy efficient. It wasn't about proving our performance. It was more about a cost and driven down to the lowest denominator a lot of the times. And that ultimately drove me to what I'm doing today. I wanted to have better buildings. I wanted to see how we can perform better, and all this will link together to operate buildings better. So if nothing else comes out of it, just think about how you performance measure people. So the facilities manager is quite hard, but if you did have a NABERS rating, let's say you put it in your lease agreement, you got a 4-star, that's going to make sure that that facilities manager or organisation or owner will make sure he's got a 4 or 4.5 star. He may have to improve it, but he definitely can't drop it. So it's about putting those measures in there that makes it quite easy to put some ownership and responsibility on other people, instead of just saying, you know, we'll provide a safe, comfortable environment, because it's very, very hard to prove that a lot of the times. So what do you need to do to get a NABERS rating is quite a common question. So it's not a complicated system, but it is rules-based. And it penalises you if you do not follow the rules in the right way. It penalises you if you don't have the right information. But in a nutshell, it's about measuring the energy use within that building for a 12-month period. So what you need for that 12-month period is utility data. So that's your billing from your electricity or gas provider, and that's verification of your energy use. You need a copy of your lease agreement. So the lease agreement's got in there, it's not saying that it operates from 8 to 6 o'clock. It's saying what times are you safe, comfortable, and lit. So quite often all your equipment will start up, and they might have about a 2-hour warm-up period in the middle of winter. It takes 2 hours to get to that comfortable condition. So NABERS is robust to say, okay, what hours are you actually providing to your tenant to provide air conditioning so they can work. It's about PCNZ drawing. So once again, it's not about I'm going to lease 1,000 square meters. It's about, well, how do you measure that space you're leasing? And it brings it back down to there's a standard that you have to measure everything and how you can include and exclude. So it brings that into account. Schematics. That's quite important, especially in New Zealand, because New Zealand context, we've got slightly different metering than in Australia, and that's one of the biggest challenges we've had with some of the tenancy. It's about where your electricity meters are. They need to be utility grade, so you can either include or exclude energy consumption. And the reason we say the schematics here is important is in tenancies around New Zealand, you might have your HVAC or your fans on your tenant board. So one, are you paying for that? Should you be paying for it? But two, we just need to be able to exclude it, otherwise we just do our whole building. But the most important thing is get an accredited assessor to come and have a look. And they'll tell you if you're ready, because it is based on 12 months worth of energy data. It's based on your operations for 12 months. So the last thing I want to see is people going to do a NABERS rating 12 months time and then realising they don't have the right documentation. So 12 months actually starts from there, so it's 24 months. So I'd really recommend going to get an assessor to come in, have a look. It's all on our NABERSNZ website, all the current assessors. I can help point you in that right direction. A question that everyone's probably in the room is asking, how much does all this cost and things like that? It really does depend on your building and the assessor. But on average, we see between $5,000 to $10,000 to do a rating, and that's all about collecting data. The more data you have and the easier you can store it, then the next year I'd expect things to get cheaper and cheaper, because all you're doing is providing data. They're putting into a calculator and spitting out a number. So it is quite low cost when you look at a lot of other different rating tools, but it is performance based. So there is a cost to it, but I don't think it's too much for what you get back. So who is rating, I guess? And here's just a bit of a snapshot. It's a variety of buildings around the country. It's not one type, and this highlights that no two buildings are the same. All the technology in these buildings are all different. The age of these buildings are all different. Matter of fact, this one and TBK next door have performed quite well in NABERS ratings, and they're older buildings that have been refurbished. So it's not just modern, architectural, full glass buildings that are going to get your best rating. They may actually be penalised because of too much glass, I'm not too sure. But once again, it doesn't worry about what it's designed or what it's meant to do. It just worries about performance, and it's measuring the most modern building to the oldest building by going back to that data set, which is energy use, lease data, square metre, and one thing I did forget to say was occupancy. So for tenancy, you've got occupancy, how many people are in that building makes a big difference. Occupancy is a default for computer count. Computer count obviously uses energy. So once again, it doesn't care if you say, I've built this building for 12,000 people or 1,200 people. It goes, how many people are in this building on a daily basis that we can count as working here? And it's got a couple of systems to do that through some staff surveys or walking around and just counting computers. It sounds very, very simple, but the best way to do a computer, how many people work in the building, count how many computers are in the building on any given day, will give you a default for how many people are in there on average, which gives you a default for how much energy is consumed by a computer. A little bit more about New Zealand context. So this picture is evolving, and as you can see from the graph, it's starting to I wouldn't say skyrocket, but it is increasing. So year on year, we're getting more and more people doing it. To start with, we found a lot of people put off by it. We're starting to get ready for it, started to get the meters in, and now we're seeing people start rating. We've got about 1.5 million square metres of rated buildings at the moment. It's about 147, 150 ratings. So we're getting about 40 a year at the moment, which doesn't sound like a lot, but once you put it into the square metres, it's actually quite a significant chunk of the building space. The challenge we've got is, once again, it's how do you get it across a lot of these low-performing buildings? How do you improve this building around New Zealand? And that's what we're interested in, and we do have some programs that can help you out there as well. So, I think I skipped a little bit. One story I was going to say to people is, why do I do this? Why do I feel this is important again? It comes back to, it's a systems approach to me. A building is there for a long time. It's about soft landings type thing. It's about getting the right people involved at the right time to make informed decisions. Coming from what I did in the past, once again, I remember going to shopping centres that had lights 5 stories high in an inaccessible place to change a light bulb. So to change a light bulb cost them tens and tens of thousands of dollars in years to come. Why not? Because facilities managers weren't engaged at the start to say, well, actually, go on guys, how are we going to change that light bulb? What sort of lighting lux do you need? Can we move it a metre and then I can change it quite easily? So it's about bringing a lot of people in at the same time instead of making sure everyone's isolated and doing their own little thing. Another thing that got me into this was about 10 years ago now, I went into a building, and this is a service call that sticks in my mind about why I changed careers and why I changed what I was doing. But I walked into a building, it was about the 16th floor, I think it was, about a 30-storey building. It was a 2 cold call, very run-of-the-mill. What we had at that time is a lot of the people said you got five hours to diagnose the problem and fix it, otherwise quote it. So I went into this building, it was a new upstart IT company, and there's a guy, dress code was quite relaxed. There's a guy in the corner, he had a hoodie on his head, so I talked to him for a little bit. He said, I'm cold, I wear my hoodie, but that's all right. The guy 2 metres away had short sleeves and a shorts on, and he was saying that I'm too hot, but that's all right, I can dress and I'm okay with that. So the lady I went to try to sort out was too cold. She had a jacket on, she had a scarf on, and said, you know, I'm just too cold. I've complained quite a few times that this is the first time I've seen anyone come up and to do it. So I went downstairs and had a look at the building management system, the computer that shows you what the air conditioning in that floor is doing. And it turned out that basically there were set points from 15 degrees to 26 degrees on this floor. And this is not uncommon, but this is something you saw all the time. And the reason for this is, instead of calling us in to have a look at the problem at the time, they had a person on site that was able to change set points, and his role was, if there was ever a complaint, the very first thing you do is change the set point. If they don't complain, then you fix it. Don't spend $500 to get somebody to have a look at it. Anyway, this had gone on for a period of time, and they kept changing the set points, but what it showed to me is these tenants in there were not comfortable. They weren't happy, even though they weren't getting any calls from the tenants in the end, because they just stopped calling. They were sick of calling the landlord saying, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. So they just gave up. So the landlord thought he was providing a comfortable environment. In actual fact, it wasn't very comfortable for anyone in there. And when I come back to, well, how do you measure that? You're not going to go around everyone all the time and do surveys of these staff, because if you ever go into an office and go and speak to everyone in the floor, how do you feel about the air conditioning, you'll get every single response will be different. It's quite a unique thing about how people feel about temperature. But what it came back to me is there a better system? Is there a better way to do that? And that's why I fall back to NABERSNZ. So if you had this building that was a premium building within Auckland, it was charging premium rents, but all the customers weren't comfortable. I feel that a tool like this can help those people decide if that landlord is doing a good job. I think in the end that building came out as a 2-star NABERS rating before they went on to fix a few things and improved it. But it that just highlighted that building wasn't working efficiently. And since they've done that, I'm assuming that a lot of the comfort levels within that building has increased. And that's ultimately why I come back to why to do NABERS. It's a very simple system, and it has a lot of reliability, and it does improve the work environment that people work. There is some concerns that it's going to increase rents, it's going to drive up prices and all that sort of stuff. We haven't seen that. In Australia context, there was some talk about that it increased the value of the assets and increased rents. But it turns out when I investigated that a little bit more, is because basically the government went and said, we're going to shift a major amount of people into one location in a very short period of time, what offices are available. And there was only a limited amount of offices, so all of a sudden the rents went up because the government came knocking and there was not enough building space and they all had to meet the 4.5-star NABERS rating. So it made it a bit challenging for them. But it did increase their rents, but that's because they went to the market all at the same time to find a very similar type of product that wasn't available. That sort of drove it up. Ultimately, it should drive operating costs down. It should improve performance of the building. It should extend the term of the assets for the landlord. So going back to that example I gave of 1 floor out of a 20-story building operating, running all your equipment at very light load for a long period of time really just ruins it. So you don't run your air conditioning and boiler at minimum load for long periods of time. It just reduces the life expectancy of it. Going back to what does EECA do? If you're not familiar, EECA is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. I work in a market engagement team when we're out there with large businesses to help improve their energy performance. We do have a few people that dabble in the state sector in different areas, so I do a lot of work for DHBs, particularly in Auckland. And we have a lot of products to help them on their way to improve their energy efficiency. So a big challenge we have in the state sector, hospitals is all right because they own a lot of the assets. I'm assuming a lot of people in this room probably don't own the asset, but you lease the asset. So your control over it's a little bit different in different sectors. And what we try to do is create programs to help a wide variety of different people. So our latest offering is ETA, Energy Transition Accelerator, and that's basically helping people transition to a low carbon future. And that's, people are putting some big declarations out there, but at the moment they've got no idea how they're going to get there in most instances. And we're there to help try to find a pathway of how they're going to make it there. Energy audits, once again, just where's all your energy being wasted, how can you improve it? Systems and process optimization, so that's about continuous improving. One thing that I find is, I don't know if people in the property industry has found any different, but I find that once a new building is completed, it gets commissioned, and generally that's what people believe is commissioning process. Until people move in and you understand how the building is meant to be used, and until you start recommissioning on seasonal basis, so in winter and summer, in the shoulder season, spring and autumn, you won't really know how that building should perform and you won't be able to optimise it properly. So we're very much trying to get it to the premium. And there's a building in Auckland at the moment that's gone through that, and they got up to a 5.5 star, and they've been able to do that within about a 12-month period because they have been continuous commissioning. Generally, most people I speak to say it takes about 3 years to understand a building, how it operates, and how to get it to perform. And I couldn't probably argue that because what I've seen in the past is people do turn it on, a lot of time pressures, and then they walk away, and then you just tinker for a few years until you get it right. Feasibility studies, that's a lot about fuel switching and tech demo. We've got energy graduates, we're trying to increase the marketplace, I guess. So it's about a little bit like procurement, the social part. We feel there's a lack of energy efficiency experts out there in the market, and we're just trying to help people go through that. So we've got some in our organisation, but at the same time we've placed about 20 in large user organisations to try to help them improve. Low emission vehicle contestable fund, which is just a fund we run on behalf of the government to increase the uptake of electric vehicles, and at the moment we're doing a bit of work to try to assist with the decarbonisation fund that the government's doing. So because of our work with large energy users, particularly hospitals, universities, defence, They've all got a lot of aging assets. They've never had money to replace. We're trying to see if we can fast forward some of those to get them to improve a little bit better. And that's ECO. But ultimately, that's a little bit of a nutshell of what NABERSNZ is. I'd just like to reiterate, that is a very simple system. It is rules-based, and it's performance. So once again, it doesn't care if you've got solar panels on the roof. It doesn't care if you've got the latest green technology. It matters if it performs better, if it informs more efficiently. And that's what it all comes down to. And it's a really simple tool that enables you to do that. And to me, I think it also enables you to put a few other KPIs in some of the contracts you put forward. So all these people that are telling you they're green, they're efficient, they're providing you the product, how do we measure that? And this is just a way to do that. And it's unbiased. The reason we put our stamp of approval on it is we did search the world for what's the best ones. And once again, this is the one we came very close to being what we thought was world leading. And the reason for that is being shown at the moment. If anyone's familiar with GRES, which is Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, it's a portfolio that a lot of people are measuring their sustainable environmental goals. And if you have a look at that, Australia and New Zealand are world leading in commercial buildings. And the reason we're world leading in commercial buildings is predominantly because of Australia and Neighbours, but also because of Green Star. So you combine Green Star and Neighbours together, we get some good operating buildings. We're beating Europe, we're beating America, we're beating Asia in operational efficiency of buildings and being able to prove the green credentials. So once again, it's not talking about being green, it's how do you prove it? And ultimately that's what we bring with ECO is how do you measure your energy? And we bring it back to quantitative data and being able to have a robust method to measure how your energy efficiency is. So a typical kilowatt a square metre is good, but it doesn't take into all those other things that I talked about. How many people are in that building? What sort of operating hours does it have? And all this will impact on your kilowatt hours a square metre. If you're running 24 hours a day, you're going to have a higher EUI, or kilowatts a square metre, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you're running 24 hours a day. It might be bad if you've got 8-hour operations a day, but you're performing the same as a 24-hour building, and it brings it back down to that level. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to improve, and that's what I'm here to talk a little bit further. So happy to take any questions or queries or anything like that as well.
In terms of the system itself, in terms of the system itself, then is that targeted towards the tenants or the landlords? Because I'm being a bit sceptical here that if it's the landlords and landlords be somewhat aware that their buildings aren't performing great, then they're going to be reluctant to use it to highlight any inefficiencies. So I'm just curious how you approach that one. Because it's not mandatory, is it? It's voluntary. Voluntary,
yes.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the last couple of years we've been pushing landlords again. We go from landlords to tenants. So it's that conundrum of the tenants aren't asking for it, I'm not going to do it. Back to that sort of scenario. And we've got at the moment, it's about 50% base building, I think it is. So that's landlord. The numbers might be a little bit skewed here in my own head. And then it's about 30% tenancy and about 20% whole building, which is quite different than Australia that's got the mandate. They've got about 80% base building and the rest is tenants. So we've got a lot more tenants and whole buildings than what we expect, and that's predominantly trying to drive landlords to do it. And we've also been trying to drive the tenants to ask for it. So we've been somewhat successful in getting the tenants to ask for it, and now landlords are doing it. But ultimately what it comes down into is you've got to do it together. You can't just target one or the other too much. So if we just get all the landlords to do it, they'll worry about base building, but then they say, but tenants are leaving their lights on, or they want me to leave it operating for 24 hours a day. So you actually got to get into it a little bit more. They did a little bit of research in the UK because that's the next place they're looking to take it at. And that was really interesting because the way they operate a lot of buildings over there is, from some of my understanding, is they'll just provide a rings bank. So chilled water and hot water, 24 hours a day, it's available. The tenants can do whatever they want to do within their floor, and they're not really about efficiency, whereas Australia and New Zealand are a lot more about the landlord owns all the assets, they'll operate the way they want, provided the tenants buy in. So yeah, I don't want to target one or the other. I think everyone's got to work together to get it, and that's the biggest thing we're seeing. If you don't work together, it won't happen. So the landlord, sorry, one other thing, the landlord may come to you and go, hey, look, our building is a 3-star at the moment, we want to get it to a 4-star, but in order to do that, we need to reduce operating times. How's that going to impact you? And when you look at it, quite often we say, but Joe comes in at 4 o'clock in the morning and he needs air conditioning because he's here at 4 o'clock in the morning, but he's a unique character because he comes in at 4 o'clock over his own will, whereas the tenancy only needs it from 8 o'clock in the morning. So who do you run the whole system for? Is it that one person that comes in at 4 o'clock in the morning who might be able to put a jumper on in the middle of the winter, or is it the whole building for that one person? So that's a lot of the conversation we have, is trying to run this whole building for that. And I think that comes back to both landlords and tenants working together. So the tenants just are saying, I want it for 4 o'clock because Joe's going to be in here. And Joe doesn't really need it, you know. At the end of the day, those buildings don't lose too much temperature overnight. They're not as hot or as cold or as stuffy as what people think, if there's only one person in that building for a short period of time, either in the morning or afternoon. So it is working together.
Any more questions?
How often do you have to reassess in order to maintain a rating? Like, is there a time limit on it? What major works would undertake a requirement to reassess the building in order to maintain a rating?
There's different things we're looking at. The rating lasts for 12 months. So from the time you start to do it, and you do it each year. But when you think of a building, it can change quite a lot in 12 months. So if you don't keep onto it, you'll lose that rating. How often you have to do it, that's up to you. But what we do find is these people that want to regularly improve, continuous improving, you don't just check it every 3 years. You've got to check it regularly. In 12 months, it's just a benchmark, whereas they have systems internally that will check it weekly and keep it going. But you're not paying for that weekly checks. That's their ongoing BMS, that's their ongoing electricity analysis that they do, and they get a rating every 12 months. How often you do it would really depend on the size. So our office, because we're eco, obviously obliged to do it. We've got a tenancy rating that's 800 odd square metres in Auckland. We do it every year. But if I'm completely honest, that wouldn't pay back. There's not the cost that you save from doing it each year isn't there. So for a tenancy, you may not want to do it every 12 months, you may want to do it every 3 years. But for a base building or a whole building, whereas a decrease of half a star, once again, is 13% energy use, that's a significant cost. And if you've got sustainability credentials, then I'd expect them to do it every 12 months. But there is a size threshold that may come into it. So that's what we're looking at the moment. What is that size threshold that makes it? We did a cost-benefit analysis about 18 months ago, and it showed anything from 1,000 square metres, but ultimately 1,500 to 2,000 square metres for a base building and whole building, not a tenancy, has energy efficiency improvements that can pay for the ratings going forward year on year if you do it. So, I think it pays for itself on an annual basis.
You talked about the performance of the people in the buildings being improved. I was wondering, do you collect any qualitative data on that, such as customer journeys or case studies, that kind of thing?
We don't at the moment, but there may be 1 or 2 coming out from some clients. So in Wynyard Quarter in Auckland, they've got some good buildings there. Precinct Properties have been doing a few buildings in that area, and they've been doing some analysis to try to determine productivity rates and improvements. They haven't shared that with us. It's not something that EEC is going to get involved with and go and do it themselves. But it's always a grey area. So yeah, we did do a report on productivity, or Australia did a report and showed significant dollar savings. But once again, everyone takes that with a little bit of grain of salt. But yeah, no, not at the moment.
I think from a government perspective, what we're interested in is there's 4 expectations that government has for the property portfolio, and 2 of them, one is around creating a better place to work, and that starts to get into sustainability and productivity, and the other one is about more efficient producing value for money. What I'm really interested with this is how it actually improves the workplace for people. The money argument is great, and it's important for people who are worried about the economics of it, but I'm more interested in how it actually improves the place that our people are working in, because I think that's where this government is trying to drive the office portfolio.
Is there any studies that you've seen or done yourself that can prove office productivity, I guess, or comfort levels?
It's more about well-being. So the living standards of New Zealanders, we spend a lot of time at work, so well-being is a very important focus for our policy direction generally. And we're very interested in case studies and qualitative data that's coming out. Seen a bit, around in sporadic areas, but it'd be great to hear if it was an area that was going to be focused on in terms of the data collection from this tool.
Yeah, no, not as yet. But the only, probably similar to you with wellbeing, we do the Warmer Kiwi Homes, the insulation program. And I remember seeing a report, it must have been 5 years plus ago, that they did. And obviously we're Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority, so the intention was to improve the efficiencies of the home. But I think in retrospect that didn't really eventuate what happened with the Warm Up New Zealand program was it insulated houses. The heater still ran the same amount of time, but it changed the minimum temperature of the house during the night from 12 to 16 degrees. So it didn't actually make the energy efficiency part work, but it did play to that well-being part, that actually your house was warmer because you could still run that same appliance the same amount of time. You just didn't get as cold at night. You stayed warmer. So I agree with you there. It's sometimes always that co-benefit, and that's always a challenge we've had. But I know Precinct have been doing some great work in some of theirs, and if they ever share it and make it publicly available, it'd be pretty cool, because they've done a lot of surveys and a lot of analysis of people, not just once they're moved into new buildings, but they're trying to do it for an ongoing period. That feeling of comfort and satisfaction and well-being soon after you move into a new building is a lot higher than what it will be 12, 24, 36 months later. So they're trying to create a lot more other data, because I think too often the data I've seen is improved well-being within the building within 6 months of moving into a new office space. Well, that's can be a little bit harder to qualify.
Hi. My question is about the audit or the assessment and the people that complete that. And just thinking about long term, as you get more buildings coming on, 40 I think you said annually, and then the maintenance of those assessments. Have you considered how you're going to manage that, sort of the assessors long term? For example, will there be a requirement for landlords to change their assessor every 3 years? Have a register of the assessors. I know you've got that already, but making sure that there's capability in that space.
Yep, we're not worried about capability. There's about 50 assessors at the moment. Once again, they just want to see a little bit more demand grow, and they'll be able to do it a little bit more in their work. So they're not prioritising it. A lot of the assessors are engineers who are doing new builds, engineering, how do I make this building efficient, and measure it against energy benchmarks within New Zealand. So as far as if I wouldn't see it doubling uptake or anything within the next 12 months or anything, but even if it did, the time required to do an assessment is not the same, is not significant. So as I said, if it's $5,000 to $10,000, that's an assessment fee. That's predominantly someone's time. It's not a 200,000 piece of work that they have to do that needs all sorts of different people. How do we maintain assessors? So to be an assessor, you've got to do a 2-day course. We work with New Zealand Green Building Council, so we at ECA own the licence. We license it from NABERSNZ Australia, and then to administer it, we've got New Zealand Green Building Council to help us. And what they do is they have a lady who sits there and does audits. So there's a percentage of level 1 audits, so everyone has to have an audit when you get done. So you get your audit done, and then there's random samples of level 2 audits, of 5% of the actual audit. So there's a level 2 audit which gets an auditor to come in and check that they're doing it the right way. So it keeps people honest and making sure people aren't making mistakes and making sure that quality remains. So it's not NZGBC saying these are the rules are already set, you have to follow them, and the auditor will check to make sure they're being followed. To become an auditor, you've got to do 2 assessments that are fully audited anyway, so you've got to make sure you've got the skills there. If one thing I haven't mentioned on the NABERSNZ website, if anyone wanted a rough idea what their building how it would perform, there's a calculator we've got. and all you need to do is put in some data about your energy use, what you use each 12 months, gas, electricity, diesel, your square metre of the building, and how many computers you've got, and you can get a spin out of basically what you do. And then what I do is go to one of the recommended auditors and see who's predominantly in your area, or maybe go onto either the NABERS site, or NZGBC has also got a site, and it shows you which out of those auditors are more active. So the ones who are more active are more likely to be doing work in that field regularly, and they can churn them out a lot quicker to a higher level.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, everybody. Hey, look, just a couple of little comments from me. And I'll throw some numbers at you, and these are a bit dated, so excuse me for that. But the total office market in New Zealand is about 8.6 million square metres, covering 6,692 leases. That's the total commercial office market. A couple of years ago, and at that stage, the government office portfolio was 1.3 million square metres. So we're a pretty big part of the commercial office market. In Wellington alone, we have 383,000 square metres of office space, and that's about 44% of the Wellington office market. So we're a pretty big player, government, as you'd expect in Wellington. So we have a big impact on the market. The other piece that I find really interesting is that 257,000 square metres of that space in Wellington is up for renewal or expiry between now and 2025. So we have a real singular opportunity to influence the nature of those leases and the ability to impose the NABERS requirement on those leases in the very, relatively short term in a sustainability sense. And I think that government really wants us to start doing that. I do have a number of questions still running around in my head. If 3-star is the average, what is it we target? Where do we think we should be? And maybe we do assessments for a year and see actually what our portfolio looks like before we start setting aggressive targets. Because the one thing for me is that you can't actually operate to a performance target if you don't know where you're at with what your baseline is. So that's a really important one. And we know that it's just good management and good property management to measure the right things in order to assess how to improve the systems and make efficiencies. Government has said that we're going to measure energy performance of government office accommodation. So government has said that, so our job now is to do that. The next 5 years, as I said, is a good opportunity to make a significant impact. What we're doing in the Government Property Group is we're preparing some standards and guidelines for the adoption of NABERS New Zealand across the government office portfolio. The draft is due to go out, when's that, Greg?
A couple of weeks, we're just doing briefing for Joan.
So we've got a draft set of standards and guidelines which will be going out across the system in the next few weeks for consultation. So I'd urge you to look for it, comment on it, and let everybody else in your organisations know that it's on the horizon, because this is going to be rolling out fairly shortly. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to Drew for this. Have a great day.